I am Nia, 34 years old, and somehow navigating the toxic labyrinth of my family's expectations. As the shadow founder and chief executive officer of a billion-dollar defense contractor, I built an empire far beyond their reach. Yet to them, I am just a jobless disappointment. A few days before the wedding, they forced me to attend my brother's fitting. Standing between velvet chairs and imported fabrics, my brother looked at his groomsmen and laughed. Don't mind her. She lives off our parents, can't hold a job to save her life. I kept my sleeves down, but I was too slow. His best man caught the scar running up my wrist. He went white, stood up, and pulled out his phone. 20 minutes later, the doors were kicked open. Before continuing this story, let me know where you started reading in the comments below. Please like and subscribe if you have ever faced family members who underestimated your worth. Growing up in a middle-class African-American home in Atlanta meant dealing with an obsession for Black excellence. Titles meant everything. Marcus, my older brother, was a sales director who wore his ambition like cheap cologne. I was the family secret they preferred to hide. They had no idea Vanguard Defense Solutions belonged to me. Today I was playing the silent, obedient bridesmaid. The air in the upscale tailor boutique smelled of leather and wool. Marcus admired his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror, adjusting a custom tuxedo he could barely afford, desperate to impress his fiancée's family. Harper sat on a sofa, sipping complimentary champagne. She was a wealthy white woman whose family owned half the city's real estate, and she thrived on making sure everyone knew it. I reached out to examine a solid black silk tie resting on the glass display counter. Harper snapped her fingers at me. Nia, put that down right now. That is imported Italian silk. You do not want to get your greasy oils on it. You cannot afford to replace it on whatever pathetic allowance your parents give you. I looked at Harper, letting her condescending smile wash over me. My parents forced me to swallow her racist microaggressions to keep the peace, desperate to secure this alliance. I did not argue. I simply placed the tie back on the display table. As I pulled my hand back, my sweater sleeve rode up just a couple of inches. It was a fraction of a second, but it was enough. Elias was standing by the window. He was Marcus's best man, a guy my brother clung to because Elias carried an aura of undeniable lethal authority. I knew exactly why Elias had that aura. He was a former Army Ranger. When my sleeve slipped, Elias's eyes locked onto my wrist. He saw the jagged, perfectly circular burn scar etched deep into my skin. It was not an accidental injury. It was the mark of a Vanguard classified thermal brand, a fail-safe protocol used only for elite operatives during compromised extractions in highly hostile territory. Very few people survived earning that scar. Even fewer knew what it actually meant. Elias stopped breathing. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him ashen. He lowered the whiskey glass he was holding, setting it down with a trembling hand. He did not say a single word to Marcus or Harper. He just stood up, his spine snapping straight into perfect military posture, and backed away into the far corner of the boutique. He pulled out his phone, his eyes darting frantically toward the street outside. Marcus noticed the movement through the mirror and chuckled loudly. Elias, man, what are you doing? Are you calling your stockbroker? Relax, the wedding is not going to bankrupt me. Elias did not answer. He pressed the phone to his ear, his voice dropping to a frantic, urgent whisper. He kept his eyes fixed on the floor, avoiding my gaze entirely. He knew exactly who he was standing in the room with, and the realization was terrifying him. Harper sighed dramatically, tossing her blonde hair over her shoulder. Seriously, Nia, you are making everyone uncomfortable. Can you just stand in the back and try not to look so miserable? You are ruining the vibe of Marcus's big day. I do not even know why your parents made me include you in the bridal party. I kept my face perfectly neutral, silently counting the seconds in my head. I knew the protocol. Once a Vanguard high-value asset was identified in an unsecured public civilian location by military personnel, the reaction time was exactly 1200 seconds. I did not need to defend myself against Harper's petty insults. My reality was entirely separate from her fragile, privileged delusions. Leave her alone, Harper. Marcus laughed, adjusting his cuffs again. She is just jealous because she has no career, no man, and no future. She will probably ask us to pay her rent next month. I watched the second hand on the boutique's vintage wall clock tick past the 12. 20 minutes had elapsed. The heavy glass doors of the tailor shop did not just open, they were violently kicked apart. The pleasant chime above the door shattered as 6 heavily armed military police officers swarmed into the boutique. Their combat boots stomped across the pristine hardwood floors, assault rifles lowered but ready. Customers screamed in terror. The tailors dropped their measuring tapes and backed against the walls. Harper shrieked, dropping her champagne flute, sending glass and alcohol shattering across the floor. Behind the tactical squad, a towering man in a heavily decorated military uniform stepped through the broken doorway. It was a 4-star general. Marcus stared at the armed men, his initial shock quickly melting into a cruel, highly arrogant grin. He looked at me, then looked at Harper, entirely misreading the situation. "Well," Marcus said, crossing his arms and shaking his head. "Looks like my deadbeat sister finally got arrested for fraud." The general did not blink at my brother's idiotic comment. He ignored Marcus entirely, treating him as an irrelevant obstacle. Military boots echoed in the suffocating silence as they secured the perimeter. Harper shrank back, her arrogance dissolving into panic. She clutched her handbag, eyes darting toward the rifles. Marcus stood frozen. His smile vanished when he realized the tactical squad was not looking at me with suspicion. They formed a protective barrier around me. The general stopped exactly in front of me, snapping his heels. The sound cracked like a gunshot. He raised his hand in a flawless salute. "Director," the general bellowed, his voice echoing. "We received the distress signal from an embedded asset. We came immediately." Before Marcus could process, the word movement flashed nearby. Elias, the former army ranger who had spotted my scar, marched forward. Bypassing my brother, he stepped into formation alongside the general. Elias snapped to attention, executing a crisp salute. He did not look at Marcus or Harper. His eyes remained fixed straight ahead, locked in absolute military deference. "Ranger Battalion 3, reporting as requested, ma'am." Elias stated, his voice steady, but carrying an undercurrent of absolute awe. The silence in the boutique was deafening. The tailors cowered behind the cash wrap, terrified. Marcus looked like all the air had been violently punched out of his lungs. He stared at Elias, his best man, treating his supposedly jobless, deadbeat sister like military royalty. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His brain simply could not bridge the gap between the sister he loved to humiliate and the woman commanding the respect of the United States Armed Forces. This shattered his entire worldview. Harper let out a pathetic, high-pitched whimper. She looked at me as if I had suddenly transformed into a monster. The racial superiority she had wielded so effortlessly just moments ago was entirely shattered. She was looking at power, real, raw, undeniable power, and it terrified her to her core. Her family's local real estate wealth meant absolutely nothing in the face of federal defense authority. I did not salute back. I simply nodded, keeping my hands resting casually by my sides. I maintained the cold, detached demeanor that had allowed me to negotiate hostage releases and secure billion-dollar weapons contracts over the last decade. "At ease, General," I said quietly. My voice did not need volume to command the room. "And you too, Elias. Stand down." The general dropped his hand but maintained his rigid posture. "Director, I must apologize for the excessive breach of security," he said, glancing at the shattered front door of the boutique. When the thermal brand protocol was flagged by this Ranger Vanguard Central Command, initiated an immediate code red. "We have a heavily armored extraction team waiting on the street. 2 Black Hawk helicopters are on standby on the roof of the adjacent building. We are ready to escort you back to the secure bunker immediately." I looked at the general, then at the terrified faces of the boutique staff. "That will not be necessary, General. There is no active threat here. The signal was triggered accidentally. My sleeve merely slipped." I turned my gaze toward my brother and his cowering fiancée. "I am currently off the clock. I am just fulfilling my designated duties as a maid of honor for my brother's wedding. We were just discussing imported Italian silk." Marcus finally snapped out of his paralysis. His face flushed a deep, angry crimson. The humiliation of being ignored combined with the absolute shattering of his fragile ego pushed him over the edge into reckless rage. He could not accept this reality. He could not accept that the sister he treated like garbage was someone of immense importance. His desperate need for superiority took over completely. "What the hell is this?" Marcus yelled, his voice cracking. He lunged forward, pushing past a military police officer before the soldier could raise his weapon. "Nia, what kind of sick, twisted scam are you running here? Did you hire these guys? Is this some kind of pathetic prank to ruin my fitting?" "Marcus, step back," I warned, my tone dropping to a dangerous whisper. He did not listen. His desperation to reclaim control of the room blinded him to the assault rifles pointed in his direction. He closed the distance between us in 2 rapid strides and violently grabbed my upper arm. His fingers dug painfully into my skin as he tried to physically yank me toward him. "You are going to tell these actors to leave right now, you pathetic loser? You are embarrassing me in front of Harper." Marcus did not even get the chance to finish his sentence. Elias moved with the brutal, blinding speed of a Tier 1 operator. He did not hesitate. He did not care that Marcus was his friend or the groom. He only saw a direct physical threat to a high-value asset. Elias grabbed Marcus by the collar of his custom tuxedo and the back of his belt. With one fluid, violently efficient motion, he swept Marcus off his feet and slammed him face first into the boutique's structural pillar. The impact rattled the mirrors. Marcus gasped in pain as the breath was forced from his lungs. Elias wrenched Marcus's arm behind his back, locking him into a tactical submission hold that pinned him completely immobile against the wall. "Do not ever touch the director again," Elias growled. Harper screamed. "Marcus, let him go. You are hurting him. Someone call the police." "Ma'am, we are the police," one officer stated flatly. Marcus groaned, his face pressed against the cold plaster. "Nia," he gasped. "Tell him to let me go." I walked over to the pillar where Elias had him pinned. I felt no pity. I only felt the cold, satisfying clarity of absolute power. I leaned very close to his ear. "Careful, Marcus," I stated softly. "Assaulting a federal defense contractor carries a 10-year minimum." I stepped back, signaling Elias with a nod. He released his tight grip, letting Marcus slide down the wall, gasping for breath. The shattered glass doors swung open. It was not a tactical extraction team stepping over the debris. It was my parents. My mother Evelyn walked in, followed closely by my father Robert. They froze, taking in the chaotic scene. Armed military police officers stood in a tight defensive perimeter. The general remained at attention near the cash wrap. Harper was sobbing loudly on the velvet sofa. Marcus was hunched over, humiliated and panting. Any normal parents would have rushed to their daughter asking if she was hurt. But my parents were not normal. Their eyes darted around the room, assessing the optics, calculating the damage to their carefully constructed social image. My mother's gaze locked onto me, her face twisting into a familiar mask of absolute disgust. She marched past the armed guards, completely ignoring the general. "Nia, what have you done?" my mother shrieked, her voice echoing. "What is the meaning of this? You brought thugs into this high-end establishment to ruin your brother's fitting." "These are not thugs, Mom," I replied evenly, keeping my hands clasped. "They are federal agents." My father stepped forward, his face flushed with embarrassment. He looked at Harper, who was now weeping, and then glared at me. "I do not care who they are. You have humiliated this family. We finally get a chance to merge with a respectable, wealthy family, and you pull a stunt like this. You have always been jealous of Marcus. You could never stand to see him succeed." The 4-star general shifted his weight, his hand moving instinctively toward his sidearm, clearly offended. I raised a single finger, silently commanding him to stand down. I did not need the United States military to handle my parents. I had spent my entire life building an armor they could never pierce. Harper seized the opportunity. She recognized that my parents would always take her side, blindly worshiping her skin color and her family's generational wealth. She let out a loud theatrical sob and pointed a manicured finger at me. "Evelyn, Robert, it was awful. Nia just went crazy. She summoned these men to attack Marcus. I feel completely unsafe around her aggressive ghetto behavior. My father will be furious when he hears about this." "Ghetto behavior," I repeated, tasting the bitter racism embedded in her words. My parents did not correct her. They did not defend me against the racial slur hurled by a privileged white woman. Instead, they doubled down. I am so incredibly sorry, Harper, my mother pleaded, rushing over to pat the sobbing woman's shoulder. Nia has always been a bitter, troubled girl. She cannot hold down a job, so she lashes out at those who have actual careers. She spun around to face me, her eyes blazing with irrational fury. Tell your little actor friends to leave right now, Nia. You are going to fix this. You are going to apologize to Harper, and you are going to pay for Marcus's tuxedo as an apology for this disgusting display. Marcus smirked, leaning against the wall as he caught his breath. He loved this. He loved watching our parents crush me to protect his fragile ego. Yeah, Nia. The custom suit is $4,000. I doubt you even have 400 in your checking account, but you better figure it out before Harper's family calls off the wedding. I looked at my mother. I looked at my father. I looked at the brother who would gladly watch me drown if it meant he could stand on my shoulders. They were demanding I empty what they assumed was my meager life savings, just to appease a racist woman who had openly insulted our heritage. It was a pathetic, groveling display of subservience. I realized then that they would never change. Their obsession with fake status had completely blinded them to reality. You want me to pay for the tuxedo? I stated, my voice devoid of any emotion. It is the absolute least you can do, my father snapped, crossing his arms. Pay the man, Nia, and maybe Harper will find it in her heart to let you remain in the bridal party. I did not argue. I turned toward the terrified tailor who was currently cowering behind his register. He looked like he was about to have a heart attack. I walked over to the counter. The military police parted seamlessly to let me through. I reached into the inner pocket of my blazer and pulled out a solid black unbranded metal card. It carried no bank logo, no name, and no expiration date. It was a direct access asset card tied to Vanguard's black budget operational funds. I placed the heavy metal card onto the glass counter. It made a sharp, definitive clink. Ring up his tuxedo, I told the tailor. In fact, ring up every single item of clothing Marcus has touched in this store today. My mother scoffed, rolling her eyes. Oh, please, that piece of plastic is probably a prepaid gift card. Do not embarrass us further, Nia. The tailor, visibly shaking, picked up the heavy black metal card. He carefully swiped it through his extremely high-end, heavily encrypted merchant terminal. The machine beeped once, silently processing the highly classified encrypted financial data. Then the terminal screen flashed red, followed by a green light that illuminated the entire counter. The tailor stared at the digital readout. He nervously rubbed his tired eyes, leaning much closer to the bright screen, as if he simply could not comprehend the massive numbers displayed. The color completely washed out of his pale face. He slowly looked up at me, his hands trembling so violently he nearly dropped the card. Ma'am, the tailor stammered, his voice cracking loudly in the silent room. This card just authorized the purchase of our entire building franchise. You are now our landlord. I left Marcus choking on his spit in the boutique. The tailor stood frozen, clutching my black metal card like it was a live grenade. My mother opened her mouth to scream an insult, determined to protect Marcus, but the four-star general stepped between us, his massive frame blocking her view. I walked out into the afternoon sun, leaving them to process the reality of who owned the ground they were standing on. People who are deeply addicted to an illusion will always fight the truth with everything they have. The armored black SUV waiting for me outside the tailor shop was entirely soundproof, heavily modified with bullet-resistant glass and a military-grade communication array. Elias opened the door for me, his eyes constantly scanning the busy Atlanta street for potential threats. I slid into the plush leather seat, the chaotic noise of the city instantly vanishing as the heavy door slammed shut. Elias got into the passenger seat, tapping the reinforced glass twice to signal our driver. Take us to the underground terminal, I instructed, calmly pulling my encrypted tablet from the center console. Copy that, director, the driver responded, merging seamlessly into the afternoon traffic. Elias turned slightly in his seat, his jaw tight. Ma'am, I have to formally apologize for the incident back there. I broke protocol by reacting visually to the brand. I compromised your operational security in a civilian sector. I will submit myself for disciplinary review immediately upon our return to base. I didn't look up from my glowing screen. Your reaction time brought a fully armed tactical squad to my location in exactly 1200 seconds, Elias. The protocol worked exactly as designed. Your loyalty is absolute, and I do not discipline soldiers for doing their jobs. However, we have a new operational objective. Connect me to Victor Vance in the Financial Warfare Division. Connecting now, Director. Within seconds, the imposing face of Vanguard's chief financial officer appeared on my tablet. Victor was a ruthless numbers man who treated corporate acquisitions like strategic military strikes. Director Victor greeted, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. I was briefed on the code red. Are you secure? I am secure, Victor, but I need you to initiate a hostile asset acquisition. Target the Vance family estate, specifically the Oakwood Crest Country Club, and all associated real estate holdings, managed by Richard Vance. I want a complete microscopic breakdown of his financial vulnerabilities. Leave no stone unturned. Victor's fingers flew across his keyboard, the sound like distant gunfire. Pulling the Vance portfolio now. Oh, this is almost too easy, Nia. Richard Vance projects the image of a billionaire, but his liquidity is severely compromised. He's heavily overleveraged on 3 major commercial properties downtown, and he has been quietly shuffling assets through dummy corporations to mask a massive deficit. Find the kill shot, Victor. Got it. Victor smiled, a predatory gleam in his eye. The Oakwood Crest Country Club. It's the crown jewel of their generational wealth, but it is bleeding money. Richard hasn't paid federal property or corporate taxes on the venue in 4 years. He currently owes the IRS exactly $4 million in back taxes. The government is quietly preparing to place a heavy lien on the property by the end of the fiscal quarter. I leaned back against the leather headrest, a slow, dangerous smile forming on my lips. Buy the debt. Victor paused. Director, purchasing that specific federal tax debt through our shell corporations will trigger an immediate transfer of the property's deed if he defaults on a 24-hour notice. That is exactly the point, I stated coldly. Purchase the debt. Draft the foreclosure contingency. I want Vanguard to officially own the ground. My brother's wedding is being held on before the rehearsal dinner tomorrow night. Also route the paperwork for the Taylor boutique we just purchased to our commercial leasing division. Triple the boutique's rent immediately, then offer the current Taylor a management position with full corporate benefits. Understood, Director. Consider the Vance estate ours. Vanguard out. The screen went black. I looked out the tinted window as our armored convoy merged onto the highway. Marcus and Harper thought they were untouchable because they stood on a mountain of generational wealth. They didn't realize I had just bought the mountain and I was fully prepared to trigger an avalanche. 24 hours later, that illusion was on full display at the rehearsal dinner. The lavish event was held at the Oakwood Crest Country Club, an ultra-exclusive, predominantly white establishment owned by Harper's wealthy father, Richard. The dining room was drowning in crystal chandeliers and generational arrogance. From the moment we walked through the heavy oak doors, Harper's family made sure we knew our place in their hierarchy. They treated my African-American parents not as future in-laws, but as desperate charity cases who should be grateful to intermarry into real wealth. The racist microaggressions were relentless. Harper's mother kept complimenting my mother on being so surprisingly well-spoken. Richard, sitting at the head of the mahogany table, loudly explained basic financial concepts to my father, speaking slowly, as if Robert had not spent 30 years working as an accountant. My parents sat there, nodding and forcing tight smiles, swallowing every single degrading insult to desperately protect Marcus's fragile elevation into the social elite. I sat quietly at the far end of the long table, sipping sparkling water and observing the pathetic performance. Elias was seated 2 chairs down from me. Since the incident at the tailor shop, he had not looked Marcus in the eye once. He sat with the rigid posture of a soldier waiting for a bomb to detonate. Marcus was sweating profusely through his newly purchased custom suit. He laughed far too loudly at Richard's terrible jokes. He constantly refilled Harper's wineglass, desperate to appease her. He was acting like a desperate servant begging for a crumb of validation from the wealthy master of the house. The main course was cleared away by silent waitstaff. That was when Richard decided to execute his calculated move. He did not stand up to offer a toast to the happy couple. Instead, he simply snapped his fingers. A young lawyer in a cheap gray suit scurried out of the shadows, handing Richard a thick leather-bound folder. Richard coldly tossed the heavy folder down the exact center of the table. It slid across the polished wood and stopped in front of my brother's plate. "Marcus!" Richard announced, his voice booming over the soft classical music playing in the background. "My daughter loves you. We are thrilled to welcome you into our family. But we have a legacy to protect. My grandfather built this prestigious club. Our real estate holdings span 3 entire counties. We need to ensure that our generational wealth remains strictly within our bloodline." Richard tapped the folder with a perfectly manicured finger, his eyes narrowing into cold slits. "This is a standard prenuptial agreement. It outlines that you completely waive all rights to alimony, property, and business equity in the event of a divorce. It also clearly stipulates that any future children will have their trust funds managed exclusively by my family's estate lawyers, not yours." The entire table went dead silent. It was a brutal financial execution broadcast for everyone in the room to see. It stripped Marcus of his dignity, his future assets, and his fundamental rights as a father before the marriage even began. My parents stared at the legal document, entirely mortified and humiliated, but they did not say a single word to defend their only son. They were far too paralyzed by their deep-seated fear of upsetting rich white people. Marcus looked down at the document. His hands were visibly shaking. He looked at Harper for support, but she simply took a sip of her wine and looked away, completely indifferent to his humiliation. Marcus was trapped in a cage of his own making. He desperately needed to prove he was not just a broke opportunist. He panicked. He leaned away from the table, frantically waving me over to his side. Reluctantly, I stood up and walked behind his chair. He grabbed my wrist hard, his voice dropping to a frantic, pathetic whisper. "Nia, you have to help me right now," Marcus hissed, sweat beading on his forehead. "You have that massive government job now. You must have some liquid cash stashed away. I need you to empty your retirement accounts right now. Transfer everything to my checking account immediately. I just need to show Richard that I have my own capital. I need to prove I am not completely broke. Do it, Nia, for the family." I stared down at my older brother. He was fully willing to bleed me dry and destroy my future just to buy the temporary respect of a racist man who clearly despised him. I did not pull my hand away. Instead, I reached past Marcus and picked up the heavy leather folder containing the prenuptial agreement. I flipped through the thick pages. The legal jargon was aggressive, explicitly designed to completely subjugate my brother. I read the final draconian clause, closed the folder, and let out a sharp, genuinely amused laugh. The confident sound cut through the tense silence of the dining room. Every single eye turned toward me in shock. Richard glared, his face turning an angry red. I tossed the prenuptial agreement back across the polished mahogany table. It slid to a smooth stop right in front of Richard's plate. I leaned forward, resting my hands firmly on the back of my brother's chair, locking eyes with the arrogant billionaire. "Richard, before you demand my brother's dignity, shouldn't you pay the $4 million you owe in back taxes for this failing golf club?" The effect of my words was instantaneous and utterly catastrophic. Richard's face lost all its color, morphing from an angry red to a sickly, translucent white. He dropped his heavy crystal wine glass. It shattered against the mahogany table, expensive red wine bleeding into the pristine white tablecloth like a fresh wound. "How?" Richard stammered, his arrogant chest suddenly caving in. "How could you possibly know about that? That information is strictly sealed by my estate lawyers." I didn't answer him. I simply gave him a cold, knowing smile, turned on my heel, and walked out of the silent dining room with Elias trailing closely behind me. I left Marcus sweating in his cheap suit, desperately trying to understand how his supposedly jobless sister had just terrified a billionaire into absolute submission. That night, Vanguard's financial division executed the final sequence of the hostile takeover. By 3:00 a.m., the massive federal tax debt had been legally acquired by a Vanguard shell corporation. By 5:00 a.m., emergency injunctions were filed. Richard Vance was no longer the owner of the Oakwood Crest Country Club. He was merely a guest on my property. To ensure absolute control over the wedding environment, I deployed Vanguard's elite logistical unit to the venue before the sun even rose. By the time the first delivery trucks arrived with the floral arrangements, my covert operatives had already integrated themselves seamlessly into the country club's staff. The valet drivers, the security personnel stationed at the gates, and the key catering supervisors were all highly trained Vanguard assets operating under strict undercover protocols. They wore the club's uniform, but they answered exclusively to my encrypted earpiece. When my parents arrived at the venue early that morning to begin their groveling apologies to Richard, they walked right past 4 former Navy SEALs who were busy polishing the brass handrails of the grand staircase. My mother and father were entirely oblivious to the military precision quietly suffocating the venue. I sat alone in the empty, dimly lit grand ballroom at 7:00 a.m. sipping a black coffee. I watched my operatives sweep the room for listening devices and establish tactical perimeters. Richard had spent the entire night frantically calling his lawyers, desperately trying to unfreeze the sudden lock on his administrative access to the club, only to be met with automated federal voicemails. He was panicking, but he was far too proud to cancel a 300-guest wedding on the morning of the event. He chose to hide his massive financial hemorrhage behind fake smiles and expensive champagne, praying he could fix it on Monday. He had no idea there wouldn't be a Monday for him. The morning of the wedding brought a torrential downpour, perfectly matching the suffocating tension inside the sprawling bridal suite. The hostile country club takeover had sent shockwaves through Richard's management staff, but Harper remained aggressively in denial. She sat in a plush makeup chair, her face a rigid mask of barely contained fury. She spent the night convincing my parents that my financial takeover was a bureaucratic error her father would fix. My parents, desperate to maintain their proximity to whiteness and generational wealth, swallowed her lies without a single question. They were downstairs appeasing wealthy guests. I stood examining my custom green bridesmaid dress hanging on the rack. I was not there to celebrate. I was there to observe my investments and finalize the complete operational transfer of the property. Harper watched me through the vanity mirror, her blue eyes dark with venom. She suddenly stood up, grabbing a large bottle of industrial stain remover from the housekeeping cart left near the bathroom door. She marched directly toward my dress. Before I could even raise a hand to stop her, she violently squeezed the bottle. A thick stream of harsh, toxic bleach splashed directly across the delicate silk bodice. The vibrant green fabric instantly hissed, bubbling and turning a sickly, ruined shade of yellow. The beautiful dress was completely destroyed in a matter of seconds. Harper dropped the plastic bottle onto the carpet, letting out a loud, entirely fake gasp of horror. "Oh no!" Harper cried out, her voice dripping with venomous sarcasm. "I am so incredibly clumsy today. I was just trying to fix a tiny smudge on the hem and the bottle just slipped right out of my hands. What a terrible tragedy." She did not look sorry at all. She looked utterly triumphant. She walked over to a nearby closet and pulled out a scratchy, ill-fitting black and white uniform meant for the catering staff. She threw it hard across the room. It hit my chest and fluttered to the floor. "Well, Nia," Harper sneered, dropping the helpless victim act completely. "Since your dress is totally ruined, you can no longer stand at the altar with us. But I am a generous bride. I will not kick you out of the venue. Since you clearly belong in the service industry anyway, put that on right now. You can go hand out cheap champagne to my wealthy relatives. Try not to spill anything with those rough hands of yours." I looked down at the catering uniform resting on the plush carpet. It was a calculated, deeply racist humiliation tactic. She wanted to physically strip me of my status and force me to serve her family like a subordinate. I simply stared at her, my expression completely blank. I had negotiated treaties with ruthless warlords. A spoiled, bankrupt socialite throwing a childish tantrum was nothing but minor background noise to me. The heavy wooden door to the bridal suite swung open. My mother and father rushed into the room holding clipboards and looking utterly exhausted from managing Richard's frantic, failing staff. My mother immediately noticed the ruined silk dress hanging on the rack and the catering uniform lying by my feet. Harper instantly burst into real manipulative tears. "Evelyn," Harper sobbed, running into my mother's arms. "I had a terrible accident with the cleaning supplies. I ruined Nia's dress. I feel so awful, but Nia is being so aggressive and mean about it. I offered her a staff uniform so she could still participate in the wedding, but she is looking at me like she wants to kill me. My mother did not even ask for my side of the story. She glared at me with absolute fury. Nia, pick that uniform up right now, my mother demanded, her voice a sharp, commanding hiss. Harper is under an immense amount of stress today, and you are making everything about yourself. You will put on that uniform, you will go downstairs, and you will serve the guests with a smile. Do not you dare ruin your brother's wedding day with your bitter, selfish pride. You owe this family your complete cooperation. My father nodded vigorously in agreement, stepping closer to intimidate me. Do as your mother says, Nia. You have already caused enough trouble with your little financial stunts last night. Wear the uniform and stay out of Marcus's way today. I looked at the two people who brought me into this world. They were actively choosing to degrade their own daughter to protect the fragile ego of a racist woman who was currently bankrupt. They were willingly sacrificing my dignity on the altar of their desperate social climbing. It was a pathetic, irreversible betrayal. I did not argue. I did not shed a single tear. I calmly bent down, picked up the scratchy black catering jacket, and slipped it on over my clothes. My mother sighed in deep, dramatic relief, gently patting Harper's back. See, Harper. Everything is fine. She will do her job. Harper smirked over my mother's shoulder, her eyes shining with malicious victory. She felt entirely invincible. She felt completely untouchable. As my parents turned around to leave the suite, I slowly raised my hand toward my chest. I carefully adjusted the stiff collar of the catering jacket. My thumb brushed against the tiny, perfectly concealed matte black button pinned to my lapel. It was a piece of classified Vanguard technology, a military-grade microcamera and audio transmitter given to me by Elias earlier that morning. I pressed the center of the button, feeling a faint, silent vibration against my collarbone. The recording light was invisible to the naked eye. I looked at Harper, who was now freely bragging to her bridesmaids about how she planned to illegally hide Marcus's assets in offshore accounts to avoid her father's massive tax fraud investigation. She was detailing every single financial crime with absolute arrogant impunity. I smiled softly, turning toward the heavy oak door. Let her keep talking. I stepped out of the bridal suite, leaving Harper to document her own financial crimes for federal evidence. The heavy mahogany door clicked shut behind me, muting the shrill laughter of the bridesmaids. The air was thick with the scent of expensive lilies and desperation. I smoothed the rough fabric of my catering uniform, preparing to head down to the main ballroom to observe my new acquisition. Before I could take 5 steps, a hand clamped down hard on my shoulder. I recognized the heavy cologne immediately. It was my father. My mother stood right beside him, holding a thick manila folder against her chest like a shield. They corralled me into a secluded alcove near the service elevators, far away from the prying eyes of Harper's wealthy guests. The lighting in the alcove was dim, casting long, harsh shadows across my parents' faces. They looked frantic, their earlier subservience replaced by a desperate, aggressive urgency. Listen to me very carefully. Nian, my father growled, his voice a low, threatening rumble. We have a massive problem, and you are going to fix it right now. He glanced nervously down the hallway to ensure no one was listening. Marcus is in trouble. His tech career is completely stalling out. He needs a massive tangible asset to leverage a large business loan by Monday morning, or his entire startup is going to collapse. If Richard finds out Marcus is essentially broke, this entire wedding will be called off. I stared at them, absorbing the absolute absurdity of their demand. They had spent the entire morning watching Harper humiliate me, forcing me into a servant uniform, and now they were cornering me to bail out the golden child. And how exactly does Marcus's financial incompetence involve me? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. My mother aggressively shoved the manila folder into my chest. Do not play dumb with us. We know you fully own that modest suburban house in the valley. It is the only real asset you have ever managed to acquire. She pulled a crisp legal deed of transfer from the folder along with a sleek silver pen. You are going to sign the deed to that house over to your brother right now. He needs the equity to secure his loan. I looked down at the legal document. It was a standard property transfer deed completely filled out, just missing my signature. They had actually brought a notary seal and prepared legal documents to a wedding to extort their own daughter. You want me to sign over my only home to fund Marcus's failing business venture? I stated, ensuring the hidden camera pinned to my lapel captured every single word of their extortion. It is your absolute duty as his sister, my father hissed, stepping closer to physically intimidate me. Marcus is the firstborn son of this family. He is the one who will carry on our legacy of black excellence. He is the one marrying into high society. You are just a single woman working odd jobs. You do not need a whole house. You can rent a cheap apartment somewhere else. If you do not sign this deed right this second, we will walk out into that ballroom and publicly disown you in front of 300 guests. We will tell everyone you are a thief and a liar. You will have absolutely no family left. The sheer audacity of their threat hung heavily in the dim alcove. They genuinely believed the threat of being disowned would break me. They thought I was still the desperate approval-seeking child they had conditioned me to be. They did not understand that I had stopped craving their toxic validation a decade ago. I looked at the pen in my mother's trembling hand. She thrust it toward me. Sign it, Nia. Prove that you actually care about this family for once in your miserable life. Save your brother's future. At that moment, Marcus turned the corner looking frantic. He spotted us in the alcove and rushed over, smoothing his expensive tuxedo jacket. He saw the deed in my mother's hands, and his eyes lit up with predatory relief. Did she do it? Marcus demanded, completely ignoring my presence as a human being. Did she sign it? The bank manager is waiting for my email confirmation right now. I need that collateral immediately. My parents looked at me, their expressions hardened into a final, ruthless ultimatum. I slowly reached out and took the silver pen from my mother's tight grip. I did not argue. I did not shed a single tear. I simply placed the legal document flat against the textured wallpaper of the alcove. I clicked the pen. With smooth, deliberate, and perfectly legible strokes, I signed my full legal name on the dotted line. I dated it, executed the transfer, and handed the document directly to my brother. Marcus snatched the paper from my hands with a loud, victorious gasp. He looked at my signature like he had just won the lottery. Finally, Marcus sneered, practically vibrating with arrogant triumph. You actually did something useful for once. Now get down to the ballroom and start serving drinks. Do not speak to anyone important. My parents exhaled in massive relief. They turned their backs on me immediately, ushering Marcus down the hallway to scan the document and send it to his desperate lenders. I stood alone in the dim alcove. A chilling smile spread across my face. Marcus truly believed he had just secured the ultimate leverage to save his pathetic tech career. He had no idea what he had forced me to give him. That modest suburban house was not a normal residential property. It was a secured shell asset deeply tied to a massive classified federal hazardous waste lien. By aggressively forcing me to sign that specific deed under extreme duress, Marcus was completely unaware that he was now legally and financially responsible to clean up a federal disaster. The reception began 2 hours later in the country club's grand ballroom. It was an opulent space dripping with crystal chandeliers and generational arrogance. I navigated the sea of wealthy guests, carrying a heavy silver tray loaded with cheap champagne. The catering uniform scratched against my skin, but I wore it with absolute indifference. The hidden camera pinned to my lapel was still rolling silently, documenting the extravagant celebration funded by Richard's failing tax-evading empire. My parents floated through the crowd, completely intoxicated by their proximity to whiteness and wealth. They laughed loudly at terrible jokes, expertly avoiding any eye contact with their daughter, who was currently serving them hors d'oeuvres. I moved anonymously through the room, collecting empty glasses and listening to the arrogant chatter of Harper's relatives. They sneered at the catering staff, treating us like invisible pieces of furniture. I simply observed them all, calculating the exact value of the assets I was about to seize from their crumbling estate. The clinking of a silver spoon against a crystal flute echoed sharply through the massive ballroom. The 300 guests quieted down, turning their attention toward the elevated main stage. Marcus stood at the center, holding a microphone. Harper clung to his side, practically glowing with the arrogant satisfaction of a woman who believed she had successfully conquered everything in her path. Elias stood dutifully to Marcus's right, his posture rigidly military, his face an unreadable mask of absolute tension. Marcus cleared his throat, flashing his signature heavily rehearsed salesman smile. He began to brag to the captivated audience. He talked about legacy, about the merging of two great dynasties, and about the limitless potential of their combined futures. Then he pivoted to his own fabricated success. He puffed out his chest, looking directly at Richard, desperate to validate his worth to his new wealthy father-in-law. "And to my beautiful new bride, I promise you a future beyond your wildest dreams," Marcus announced, his voice booming through the heavy acoustic speakers. "This coming Monday morning, my tech startup is finalizing a deal that will change the landscape of Silicon Valley forever. I will be sitting down with the executive board of Vanguard Defense Solutions to sign a life-changing $100 million software contract. I am going to build a titan of an industry." The sheer blinding audacity of my brother trying to sell my own company's name as his golden ticket was almost too perfect. Vanguard Defense Solutions. He actually said it out loud in front of 300 elite witnesses. He had absolutely no idea he was bragging about a contract I had personally flagged for a corporate espionage investigation just 3 days ago. The crowd applauded enthusiastically. Richard nodded from his seat at the head table, finally looking somewhat impressed by the financial numbers my brother had just thrown into the air. My parents beamed with toxic pride, their chests swelling as they basked in the reflected glory of their golden child. But Marcus could not just leave it at that. His fragile ego demanded a sacrifice. He needed to elevate himself by crushing someone else. He scanned the ballroom, his eyes searching the dimly lit crowd until they locked onto me. I was standing near the heavy wooden back doors, holding the empty silver tray against my hip. "Success is always a choice," Marcus continued, pointing his microphone directly at me. The lighting technician followed his gesture, and a bright white spotlight swung around, illuminating me in my ill-fitting catering uniform for all 300 elite guests to see. Whispers erupted across the ballroom as people turned in their chairs to stare. "We all have the exact same opportunities in life. Look at my sister Nia standing over there in the back. She serves as a perfect reminder to stay motivated. Some people choose to build empires, and some people choose to hand out drinks because they cannot handle real work. Cheers to choosing excellence and never settling for mediocrity." The wealthy crowd let out a collective, condescending chuckle. My father nodded in agreement, completely unbothered by the public humiliation of his own daughter. My mother actually smiled, hiding her face behind her wine glass, as she laughed along with Harper's racist relatives. Harper smirked, completely victorious. She leaned into Marcus, whispering something in his ear that made him grin wider. The silence that followed the cruel laughter was sudden and incredibly heavy. Elias did not laugh. He did not smile. The former Army Ranger stood on the stage, staring down at my brother with a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. The brutal internal battle Elias had been fighting since the incident at the tailor shop was officially over. He looked at the arrogant man he had mistakenly called his best friend, then looked past the sea of wealthy guests directly at me, his former commanding officer. The respect he held for the uniform and the chain of command vastly outweighed the pathetic loyalty Marcus demanded. Elias reached up to his lapel. With slow, deliberate precision, he unpinned the expensive white rose boutonniere Harper had aggressively forced him to wear for the photos. He held the delicate flower over his full glass of champagne and simply dropped it in. He did not say a single word to Marcus. He turned his back on the stunned groom, walked slowly down the carpeted stage steps, and marched straight through the parted crowd of 300 guests to stand silently at absolute attention, right behind me. The murmurs in the room escalated into confused gasps. Marcus lowered his microphone, his arrogant smile faltering as he watched his best man abandon him. Harper stared in absolute shock, her perfect moment ruined. The spotlight remained fixed on me, but I was no longer standing alone in the shadows. I had a highly trained soldier covering my flank, waiting silently for my command. The guests began to point toward us, completely bewildered. The balance of power had officially shifted and Marcus knew it. Murmurs in the grand ballroom grew louder, echoing off the chandeliers. Marcus remained frozen behind the microphone on the elevated stage, his face completely devoid of its previous arrogance. He stared at Elias, his mind struggling to process the defection. The balance of power shifted, but Harper was incapable of reading the room. Her face turned an ugly mottled shade of crimson. The perfectly curated facade of the blushing elegant bride completely evaporated, leaving behind nothing but raw, unfiltered entitlement. She hiked up her designer wedding gown and stomped down the stairs. She bypassed her new husband entirely, marching straight across the dance floor toward the back doors where Elias and I were standing. The wealthy guests parted like the Red Sea, their eyes wide with scandalous anticipation. My parents stood up from the head table, their faces masks of absolute panic. They desperately wanted to intervene, to drag me out the back door themselves to save the event. But they were too terrified to cause a larger scene in front of Richard's elite social circle. They simply watched, paralyzed by their own cowardice, as Harper closed the distance between us. She did not look at Elias. She locked her furious blue eyes directly onto me. She stopped just 2 feet away, practically vibrating with rage. "Where is the catering manager?" Harper screamed, her voice shrill and echoing loudly across the silent ballroom. "I want the catering manager right here, right this very second." A nervous older man named Gregory, wearing a neat black suit with a gold name tag, hurried over from the kitchen corridor. He looked terrified, wiping his sweaty palms on his trousers. "Yes, ma'am. How can I help you, Mrs. Vance?" Harper pointed a manicured, trembling finger directly at my face. "I want this insubordinate trash thrown out onto the street immediately. I want her fired on the spot, and I want you to ensure she does not receive a single cent of pay for tonight. She is intentionally trying to ruin my perfect day with her pathetic attention-seeking behavior. Get her out of my sight." Gregory looked completely bewildered. He stared at me in my scratchy catering uniform, then looked back at Harper. He swallowed hard, clearly confused by the absurd demand. "Ma'am, I apologize for any disruption, but I cannot fire her. That woman is the groom's biological sister. She is not an employee of my catering company. I have absolutely no idea why she is wearing one of our spare service jackets." Harper's jaw dropped. The public confirmation that I was not a hired servant, coupled with the realization that she had no direct authority over my employment, pushed her completely over the edge of rational thought. Her profound racism and fragile ego could not handle the defiance. She let out a guttural sound of pure frustration. "You worthless, jealous spinster!" Harper hissed, her eyes blazing with malice. "You have been trying to sabotage me since the tailor shop. You are nothing but a pathetic burden on this family, and I'm going to teach you a lesson." Harper raised her right hand high into the air, her diamond engagement ring catching the light of the chandeliers. She swung her arm down with all her strength, aiming a vicious open-handed slap directly at my left cheek. I did not flinch. I did not raise my arms to protect myself. I simply maintained my calm, detached gaze, knowing exactly what was about to happen. Before Harper's hand could come within 6 inches of my face, Elias moved. He intercepted her strike with the terrifying, blinding speed of a Tier 1 military operator. He caught her wrist firmly mid-air, stopping her hand dead in its tracks. He did not squeeze hard enough to bruise her delicate skin or snap her fragile bones, but his grip was an immovable, unyielding vice of solid muscle. Harper gasped in shock, trying desperately to yank her arm back, but she was completely trapped. "Do not attempt to strike her again," Elias warned, his voice a low, commanding rumble that carried a lethal promise. "If you raise your hand toward the director one more time, I will consider it a direct physical threat, and I will neutralize it accordingly. Step back immediately." Elias released her wrist with a sharp downward motion. Harper stumbled backward, clutching her arm to her chest, as if she had been severely burned. She looked at Elias with absolute disbelief, then turned her frantic gaze toward the head table. She sought out her father, the billionaire patriarch who controlled the entire country club. "Daddy!" Harper shrieked, tears of sheer rage finally spilling over her heavily powdered cheeks. "Daddy, do something. They are attacking me at my own wedding. Call your private security detail right now. I want them dragged out of here and arrested for trespassing and assault." Richard Vance's face turned a dangerous shade of purple. He stood up abruptly, knocking his expensive crystal wineglass over. He gestured aggressively toward the perimeter of the grand ballroom. Instantly, the country club's elite private security team mobilized. There were 12 men in total, all dressed in sharp black tactical suits with discreet earpieces. They were highly trained, heavily armed professionals hired to protect the wealthiest families in the state. My mother let out a loud, pathetic wail of despair, burying her face in my father's shoulder. They truly believed this was the end. They believed their daughter was about to be brutally arrested and hauled away in handcuffs, forever ruining their precious proximity to white generational wealth. The guests scrambled out of the way as the 12 armed security guards marched in perfect synchronization across the polished dance floor. Richard pointed a commanding finger at me, expecting his highly paid mercenaries to tackle me to the ground. Harper smirked through her tears, anticipating my violent public humiliation. But the security team did not stop at Richard's table. They marched right past the furious billionaire. They completely ignored Harper's frantic, screaming demands. They reached the back of the ballroom where Elias and I were standing. Simultaneously, all 12 men raised their right hands and tapped their wireless earpieces in perfect unified military coordination. They instantly turned their backs to me, forming a flawless, impenetrable, heavily armed protective perimeter around me. They faced the stunned wedding guests, their hands resting cautiously near their holstered weapons. The team leader, a tall man with a severe expression, looked directly at Richard, then spoke loudly enough for the entire ballroom to hear. "Vanguard Protocol Alpha engaged. Awaiting your orders, Director." Richard Vance stood paralyzed. The billionaire patriarch stared at the 12 heavily armed men forming a human shield around me. He opened his mouth to bark an order, but the words died. The security detail did not even flinch. They kept their hands resting near their holstered weapons, their eyes scanning the crowd for any sudden movements. Harper let out a high-pitched gasp, looking between her father and the guards. She could not comprehend why the hired help was bowing to a caterer. The sheer impossibility of the situation broke her fragile mind. A screech of microphone feedback shattered the deafening silence in the grand ballroom. My father, Robert, marched over to the DJ booth and violently snatched a wireless microphone. His face was slick with sweat, his eyes wide with absolute untethered panic. He saw his entire social climbing fantasy collapsing in real time. He saw the wealthy white family he desperately worshipped backing away from us in horror. Instead of wondering why elite security operatives called his daughter Director, he chose to protect his proximity to the elite. He chose to destroy me to save Marcus. "Ladies and gentlemen," my father's voice boomed over the speakers, trembling with raw desperation. "I must deeply apologize to Richard, to Harper, and to all the esteemed guests present tonight. What you are witnessing is the tragic result of a deeply disturbed, pathologically jealous individual." He pointed a shaking finger directly at me, addressing the 300 guests, watching the spectacle with bated breath. "This woman standing before you is a disgrace," my father announced loudly, making sure his voice reached the furthest corners of the opulent room. "Nia has always been a bitter, lying failure. She spent her entire life trying to tear down her brother because she could never achieve anything on her own. I do not know how she tricked these security guards or what pathetic illegal scam she is running today, but I will not allow her to ruin this beautiful union. As of this exact moment, she is no longer a part of our family. We officially wash our hands of her entirely." A collective gasp rippled through the wealthy crowd. Public disownment at a wedding reception was a spectacle even these socialites had never witnessed. Marcus, standing on the elevated stage, visibly relaxed. A cruel, triumphant grin spread across his face. He nodded at our father, satisfied that I was being executed to save his day. Harper mirrored his expression. The tears vanished from her cheeks, replaced by a vicious smirk. She crossed her arms, looking at me like I was garbage finally being thrown out. My mother, Evelyn, rushed to stand beside my father. She grabbed his arm, nodding vigorously to show a united front to Richard's family. She glared at me, her eyes filled with nothing but pure, unadulterated venom. I did not break my composure. I did not shed a tear. I stepped forward, parting the armed security perimeter with a gentle wave of my hand. I walked slowly until I was 10 feet away from my parents. The harsh overhead lighting caught the silver tray abandoned on a nearby table, a stark reminder of the catering uniform they forced me to wear. "Let me be absolutely clear about what is happening right now," I said. My voice did not need a microphone. The acoustic design of the grand ballroom carried my calm, lethal tone to every single person in the room. "I am giving you both one final opportunity to reconsider. Are you standing in front of these people choosing to blindly worship a toxic, overtly racist family over your own blood? Are you officially confirming your choice to protect Marcus's fragile ego over the truth?" My father did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. "You are not the truth, Nia. You are a toxic, jealous burden. You are nothing but an embarrassment to our legacy." I shifted my gaze to my mother. "And you, Mom? You agree with this public execution, you are choosing them over me." My mother spat her response, her voice dripping with malice. "You lost the right to call me Mom the second you brought your ghetto behavior into this venue. We do not want you. Marcus is our future. You are absolutely nothing to us. Leave right now and never contact us again." I stared at the two people who had brought me into this world. I memorized the exact look of hatred on their faces. I felt a profound, chilling sense of total liberation. The heavy chains of familial obligation I had carried for 34 years simply snapped and vanished. "Understood," I stated clearly. I reached into the pocket of my catering uniform and pulled out my encrypted mobile device. The screen illuminated my face in the dim ballroom lighting. I opened a secure black-budget financial application interface. For the past 5 years, I quietly used a dummy corporation to secretly fund my parents' lavish lifestyle. I paid their massive mortgage. I paid their luxury car leases. I paid the exorbitant monthly fees for their elite social clubs so they could pretend they were affluent enough to match Marcus's delusions of grandeur. They thought it was old pension money. They were profoundly mistaken. I looked my mother dead in the eyes. I raised my encrypted phone. "Disownment accepted," I whispered softly. I tapped a single red button on the digital screen. Instantly, the sharp, piercing sound of text message alerts shattered the silence. My father's phone buzzed aggressively in his tuxedo pocket. My mother's phone chimed violently inside her designer clutch. Marcus's phone beeped loudly from the stage. My father nervously pulled out his device, his brow furrowing as he read the glowing screen. His eyes widened in absolute paralyzing terror. My mother gasped as she looked at her own notifications. Every single credit card, every outstanding mortgage payment, every luxury auto lease, and every elite country club fee had just been permanently canceled. Sunday morning sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains of the luxury bridal suite at the Oakwood Crest Country Club. The plush carpet was completely buried under shredded silver wrapping paper and velvet gift boxes. Marcus lounged on the oversized leather sofa, wearing a silk robe he had charged to my mother's now-canceled credit card. He tossed a crystal decanter stopper into the air and caught it, a smug grin plastered across his face. He felt like the absolute king of the world. In his arrogant mind, he had successfully eradicated the only threat to his fragile ego. He had humiliated his sister, secured his status with a wealthy white family, and forced his parents to choose him. Harper sat at the vanity, aggressively admiring her massive diamond ring in the mirror. She was positively glowing with the toxic satisfaction of a woman who believed she had just permanently destroyed her enemies. "I still cannot believe your parents actually disowned her right in front of everyone." Harper laughed, taking a long sip of her mimosa. "It was the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." Nia looked so incredibly pathetic standing there in that cheap catering jacket. My father was absolutely furious about the scene she caused, but kicking her out definitely saved the entire reception. We finally put that jealous loser in her exact place. Marcus chuckled, walking over to massage her shoulders. "I told you I would handle it, babe. Nia has always been a bitter burden. She is completely cut off now. My parents will never speak to her again, and she has absolutely nothing to her name. I, on the other hand, have a $100 million software contract to sign with Vanguard Defense Solutions tomorrow morning. Plus, I finally forced her to sign over the deed to her house yesterday. We are officially untouchable. Harper smiled, leaning back against him. Speaking of our fabulous new life, you need to confirm our first-class flights to the Maldives for tomorrow night. My father's concierge booked the resort, but the travel upgrades are on you. Do not keep me waiting, Marcus. I want the confirmation emails in my inbox right now. Marcus kissed her cheek and grabbed his smartphone from the glass table. Consider it done. Only the best for my beautiful wife. He opened his luxury travel application, navigating to the upgraded flight itinerary. He selected the premium seats and tapped the payment button. The application loaded for 3 seconds before a bright red error message flashed across the screen. Payment declined. Please use an alternate method. Marcus frowned, assuming it was a simple fraud protection trigger due to the high cost. He quickly opened his digital wallet and selected his secondary platinum credit card. He pressed the button again. The screen flashed red a second time. Transaction denied. Account frozen. A cold, uncomfortable bead of sweat formed at the base of Marcus's neck. He glanced nervously at Harper, who was busy unboxing a set of silver champagne flutes. He opened his banking application to check his balances. His personal checking account showed a severe negative balance. His business account, which he used to fund his failing tech startup, was entirely locked. A bold notification read that all assets were temporarily suspended pending a federal review. Marcus felt his chest tighten. This had to be a mistake. Is there a problem with the flights? Harper asked, her tone instantly dropping its playful edge. She turned around, her blue eyes narrowing as she studied his panicked expression. Marcus, please do not tell me your cards are bouncing. My father already had to pay out of pocket for the extra security yesterday because of your insane sister. Do you actually have the money you promised me, or was all that talk just empty bragging? Everything is completely fine. Marcus lied quickly, forcing a fake, confident laugh. It is just an automatic security hold. Banks always freeze cards when they see massive wedding expenses. I am a tech executive, Harper. I have massive liquid assets. Give me 5 minutes to call my private wealth manager and sort this out. Marcus practically ran into the suite's massive marble bathroom, locking the heavy door behind him. His hands were shaking uncontrollably as he dialed his bank's emergency customer service line. After 5 agonizing minutes of waiting, a representative informed him that his accounts were frozen due to a massive unexpected lien placed on his newly acquired Social Security assets. Marcus did not understand. He hung up, his breathing growing shallow and erratic. He needed cash immediately, or Harper would humiliate him and call off the honeymoon. He remembered the manila folder his parents had handed him yesterday. He had the legally binding, fully executed deed to my house. Marcus dialed the number of a high-risk private lender he knew from his desperate startup days. The lender answered on the second ring. Marcus frantically explained that he had acquired a residential property in the suburbs free and clear. He offered to use the original deed as direct collateral for a rapid emergency line of credit of $100,000. The lender agreed to review the asset, instructing Marcus to email over the scanned documents he had saved on his phone. Marcus sent the files, pacing the bathroom floor like a trapped animal, praying the money would clear before Harper lost her temper. 10 minutes later, his phone rang. It was not the private lender. The caller identification displayed the United States Department of the Treasury. Marcus answered, his voice trembling. "Is this Marcus Vance?" a stern, uncompromising male voice asked. "Yes, this is him," Marcus replied, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Are you calling about my line of credit?" "I am the regional director for federal asset management," the man stated coldly. "We received a flag regarding an attempted collateral loan using a restricted property. Mr. Vance, we have confirmed that you executed a transfer deed yesterday, legally assuming full ownership of the property located in the valley." "Yes, it is my house now," Marcus insisted desperately. "It is worth at least $400,000. I need a loan against it." "You clearly did not read the federal disclosures attached to that deed," the director replied, his voice completely devoid of pity. "That specific property sits directly on top of a highly classified, severely contaminated federal hazardous waste dump. It was condemned 5 years ago. By aggressively forcing the previous owner to sign that deed over to you, you legally assumed all attached liabilities. Marcus stopped breathing. The bathroom walls seemed to close in around him. What liabilities? What are you talking about? You are now the sole owner of a toxic federal disaster zone, the director announced bluntly. You owe the Environmental Protection Agency exactly $2.5 million in immediate mandatory hazardous cleanup fees. The debt is due upon receipt. Your bank accounts have been seized, and your passports are officially flagged for flight risk. Have a nice day. Marcus dropped his phone onto the cool marble floor of the bridal suite bathroom. The heavy thud echoed his internal collapse. $2.5 million. It was an absolute death sentence. His entire fraudulent empire was disintegrating before his eyes. He stared at his pale reflection in the mirror, raw panic constricting his throat. If Harper found out about this debt, she would leave him immediately. If Richard found out he had been played, he would be completely destroyed. I desperately needed a miracle right now. He needed massive liquid cash, and he needed it yesterday. Then a desperate lifeline flickered in his frantic mind. The Vanguard Defense Solutions contract. His Monday morning pitch was for exactly $100 million. If he secured even a fraction of that in an advance signing bonus, he could easily pay off the federal lien, unfreeze his accounts, and successfully maintain the illusion of his wealth. He just had to keep Harper completely in the dark for 24 more hours. He splashed freezing water on his face, slapped on his salesman's smile, and confidently walked back into the suite. He lied to his bride, claiming the bank issue was sorted, and promised her the world. Monday morning arrived with a biting, unforgiving chill. Marcus and Harper pulled up to the Vanguard Defense Solutions global headquarters in a rented luxury sedan he had to pay for in cash, using the very last of Harper's emergency funds. The Vanguard building was an intimidating monolith of black glass and reinforced steel, heavily dominating the city skyline. It screamed limitless power, extreme wealth, and impenetrable security. Marcus adjusted his imported silk tie, his palms sweating profusely as he stared up at the massive corporate logo. Harper walked closely beside him, tightly clutching her designer handbag, her nose turned up in perpetual arrogant disgust. She was highly agitated about the frozen credit cards from yesterday and aggressively demanded that Marcus secure this massive contract immediately to fund their delayed honeymoon. They strutted through the massive revolving doors into the ultra-modern, heavily guarded corporate lobby. The expansive space was pristine, stark white and buzzing with highly focused, sharply dressed professionals moving with intense military precision. Marcus boldly approached the front desk with aggressive, completely unearned authority. He slapped his leather briefcase down hard on the polished quartz counter. "Marcus Vance," he announced loudly, fully expecting the entire room to stop and stare at him in awe. "I am the founder and chief executive officer of Vance Technologies. I have a highly important 9 o'clock pitch scheduled with your executive board. I need you to bypass the standard security protocols and give me immediate access to your chief executive officer. We are about to sign a very lucrative industry-changing partnership, and I simply do not have time to wait around in a public lobby with the regular people." The receptionist, a sharp African-American woman in a flawless tailored corporate uniform, did not flinch at his loud demands. She calmly typed his name into her secure terminal. "Good morning, Mr. Vance. I see your scheduled presentation with our acquisitions committee. However, you will need to take a seat in the waiting area. The chief executive officer does not take unscheduled direct meetings with prospective vendors." Marcus bristled angrily at the word vendor. "You clearly do not understand who I am. I am not a vendor. I am a future equity partner. Pick up your phone right now and tell your boss that Marcus Vance is here. I guarantee they will want to roll out the red carpet for my arrival." Harper sighed loudly, rolling her eyes and leaning heavily against the counter. "Marcus, this is absolutely ridiculous. Why are we dealing with these incompetent diversity hires? This company might have massive government contracts, but their front-end staff is completely unprofessional and incredibly rude. Just call the executive board directly and get this girl severely reprimanded. I am so tired of standing here in these uncomfortable heels." The receptionist's expression remained perfectly neutral, though her dark eyes hardened into polished stone. She slowly looked Harper up and down, processing the blatant, ugly racism without losing an ounce of her professional composure. "Ma'am, our strict security protocols apply to absolutely everyone regardless of their self-perceived importance. You will both need to sit down and wait to be called. Marcus violently slammed his fist on the court's counter. His deep financial desperation was making him incredibly reckless. Listen to me very carefully. You are going to give me a VIP access badge right this second, or I am going to make sure your name is the very first one on the termination list when I restructure this department tomorrow. Before the receptionist could answer his pathetic threat, a low melodic chime echoed clearly through the expansive lobby. It was not the sound of the standard visitor elevators. The distinct chime came from the far end of the room, where a solitary bulletproof glass elevator stood guarded by two heavily armed security personnel. It was the private direct access lift reserved exclusively for the absolute highest level of Vanguard Command. The heavy steel doors slid open with a soft, powerful hydraulic hiss. Marcus and Harper immediately turned around, expecting to see a gray-haired military veteran or a famous billionaire tech mogul stepping out to greet them. Nia stepped out. She was wearing a flawless, custom-tailored $10,000 Tom Ford suit that radiated absolute lethal authority. Her posture was commanding, her expression a mask of cold, untouchable power. She was flanked on her right by Elias, dressed in a sharp security director uniform, and on her left by two high-ranking corporate executives carrying thick legal dossiers. The busy lobby instantly fell dead silent. Every single employee stopped what they were doing and stood at rigid attention. The receptionist behind the court's counter immediately stood up, crossed her hands politely in front of her, and bowed her head in deep, genuine respect. "Good morning, Madam CEO." Marcus and Harper practically collapsed against the heavy mahogany double doors of the 50th floor boardroom, shoving them open with whatever physical strength they had left after the climb. The emergency stairwell had been a brutal, humiliating, and physically agonizing vertical climb that felt endless. 50 flights of concrete stairs had completely destroyed their carefully curated high society facade in minutes. Marcus was gasping for air, his face flushed a dangerous, mottled shade of purple. Sweat poured down his forehead, completely soaking the stiff collar of his custom-tailored shirt. His chest heaved violently with every single desperate breath. Harper looked even worse. Her designer heels dangled from her left hand, and her blonde hair was plastered to wet cheeks. Her lungs heaved as she leaned against the polished doorframe, letting out a pathetic wheeze. She looked entirely ready to pass out right there on the premium carpet. They looked nothing like the untouchable power couple they had pretended to be downstairs. They looked like desperate animals fighting for survival. The boardroom itself was a terrifying masterpiece of corporate intimidation. The space was enormous, featuring floor-to-ceiling glass windows that offered a dizzying view of the entire city skyline. In the center of the room sat a massive polished obsidian table that seemed to absorb all the light. Gathered around this imposing table were the 12 members of the Vanguard Defense Solutions Board of Directors. They were dressed in immaculate dark suits, their expressions cold, calculating, and entirely unreadable. They did not blink as Marcus and Harper stumbled into the room. They simply stared, analyzing the frantic, sweating man who had come to beg for $100 million. At the very head of the obsidian table, positioned directly in front of the sweeping panoramic window, sat an oversized, high-backed leather executive chair. The chair was currently swiveled all the way around, facing the glass, deliberately obscuring the identity of the person sitting inside it. The sheer silence in the room was heavier than the physical exhaustion weighing down on Marcus's shoulders. The powerful executive simply waited for the presentation to officially begin. Marcus took a deep, ragged breath, desperately forcing oxygen into his burning lungs. He wiped the heavy sweat from his brow using the sleeve of his jacket. He could not afford to look weak in front of this elite corporate tribunal. The massive federal lien on his new house was a ticking time bomb, and his bank accounts were entirely frozen. He urgently needed this lucrative contract to survive the impending financial ruin hovering over his head. He aggressively straightened his posture, puffing out his chest as he marched toward the front of the room. He motioned for Harper to sit down, treating her with a harsh wave. He slapped his expensive leather briefcase onto the slick table and popped the golden latches. He pulled out his presentation tablet, plugging it into the projection system with violently shaking hands. A large holographic screen dropped down from the ceiling, illuminating the dark room. Marcus forced his signature, arrogant salesman smile back onto his sweating face. He looked around the vast table, attempting to establish immediate dominance over the silent board members. He firmly believed his inherent charisma could easily overwrite his highly unprofessional, utterly chaotic entrance. "Good morning, esteemed members of the board," Marcus announced, his voice regaining its usual booming confidence. "I sincerely apologize for our slightly unorthodox entrance today. Vance Technologies always goes the extra mile to deliver on time, even if it means taking the stairs to the 50th floor." He chuckled, hoping for a polite laugh, but the room remained dead silent. The executives continued to stare at him like a specimen under a microscope. Undeterred, Marcus pushed forward, bringing up his first title slide on the massive screen. "We are here to finalize our exclusive partnership today. My advanced software architecture is guaranteed to revolutionize your global defense logistics. I know exactly how to overcome significant obstacles to achieve absolute excellence in the corporate world. For example, my completely worthless sister actually tried to sabotage this very meeting downstairs in your lobby just a few minutes ago. She works as some low-level diversity hire here, and her bitter jealousy almost cost you this incredible deal. She has always been a pathetic burden on my successful family, desperately trying to steal my spotlight. But as you can clearly see, I never let unmotivated people stand in the way of massive corporate progress. I trim the fat, and I focus exclusively on creating unparalleled wealth for my investors." Marcus paused eagerly, waiting for the board of directors to validate his crude, highly unprofessional anecdote. He expected them to nod in agreement, to loudly praise his ruthless dedication to the bottom line. He fully anticipated a round of applause for overcoming the supposed obstacles created by his own family member. Instead, the atmosphere in the boardroom grew even colder, the air conditioning suddenly feeling like a freezing winter wind. The 12 elite board members did not react to his sleazy, demeaning joke at all. They did not offer him a single smile or a word of encouragement. They simply shifted their cold, calculating gazes away from Marcus and looked directly toward the head of the long obsidian table. Marcus followed their eyes, his own arrogant smile faltering slightly as a deep, unsettling feeling of dread began to pool in his stomach. The oversized, high-backed leather executive chair slowly began to swivel around, the smooth mechanism completely silent. Marcus held his breath, anticipating the face of a ruthless, seasoned defense contractor. The chair finally rotated to face the room. Nia sat there impeccably poised, her posture radiating an absolute terrifying authority. She was resting her elbows on the polished armrests, slowly steepling her fingers together while maintaining steady, unblinking eye contact with her older brother. "I didn't sabotage you, Marcus," Nia stated, her voice slicing through the silence like a razor blade. "I just wanted to evaluate my investments personally. Proceed." Marcus stared at me, his jaw unhinged. The expensive leather briefcase slipped from his trembling hands, hitting the polished floor with a dull thud. His brain could not process the visual information in front of him. The sister he had mocked at the tailor shop, the woman he had forced into a catering uniform at his lavish wedding, was sitting at the head of the Vanguard Defense Solutions boardroom. The 12 elite board members remained perfectly still, watching him unravel. They knew exactly who I was. I was the undisputed architect of this massive empire, and he was just a desperate, sweating man begging for my money. Harper reacted differently. Pure survival instinct overrode her initial shock. The woman who had deliberately thrown bleach on my bridesmaid dress suddenly forced a wide, desperate smile onto her face. She practically shoved Marcus aside to get closer to the obsidian table. "Nia, oh my goodness, this is incredible," Harper gushed, her voice dripping with fake, sickeningly sweet affection. "You are the chief executive officer here. We had absolutely no idea. Marcus, look at your sister. This is so wonderful. We are all family here. This completely changes everything about the upcoming contract." I did not smile back. I kept my eyes locked directly on Marcus, treating Harper like an annoying draft in the room. "Security!" I commanded, my voice flat, sharp, and authoritative. Elias immediately stepped forward, his hand resting heavily on his tactical radio. If the unregistered guest speaks again without being explicitly addressed by this board, remove her from the building. Harper gasped loudly, her fake smile instantly collapsing into a mask of pure terror. She shrank back against the wall, finally understanding that her white privilege held absolutely zero currency in my boardroom. Here I was, the only authority that truly mattered. Now, Marcus. I continued, gesturing smoothly toward the paused holographic projection. You came here to pitch a $100 million software architecture. You boldly claimed it would permanently revolutionize global defense logistics. You have exactly 45 seconds left to convince my board why we should not throw you out for wasting our valuable time. Marcus swallowed hard. He scrambled to pick up his fallen briefcase, his hands slick with cold sweat. He frantically grabbed his remote clicker, desperately trying to salvage his shattered pride and failing startup. Right, Marcus stammered, his voice cracking horribly. The Vance protocol uses highly advanced predictive algorithms. It integrates directly with frontline supply chains. He aggressively clicked to the next slide, displaying a highly complex, colorful flowchart. It optimizes deployment speeds by 30%. I firmly pressed a button on the digital console embedded in my leather armrest. Marcus's detailed slide instantly vanished from the massive screen. It was abruptly replaced by a highly detailed red-line diagnostic breakdown of his entire system. Your predictive algorithm is fundamentally flawed, I stated, coldly analyzing the data displayed on the screen. You are heavily relying on a linear data progression model that completely fails to account for asymmetric warfare variables. In a real-world combat scenario, your routing sequence would leave forward operating bases entirely without ammunition for up to 48 hours. You are trying to sell us a logistical suicide mission. Marcus wiped his forehead, visibly panicking as the board members glared at him. No, that is not accurate. The machine learning adapts to real-time variables. The core infrastructure is completely revolutionary. He frantically clicked his remote multiple times to bring up his technical specifications. Rows of complex glowing green code filled the holographic display. He pointed a shaking finger at the screen, his deep financial desperation making him incredibly reckless. Look at the back-end framework right here. This is purely proprietary software. My team built this from the ground up over the last 18 months. There is absolutely nothing like this on the commercial or military market. It is a completely unique, impenetrable system. I slowly leaned forward, resting my chin carefully on my steepled fingers. I looked at the complex code scrolling continuously across the screen, then looked back at my older brother. He was truly pathetic. He had spent his entire life arrogantly taking credit for other people's hard work, heavily relying on our parents to clean up his constant messes and falsely elevate his mediocre achievements to the status of black excellence. He genuinely thought he could do the exact same thing in the ruthless, unforgiving world of international defense contracting. I pressed another silver button on my console. The massive holographic screen split perfectly down the middle. On the left side of the screen remained the supposedly proprietary code Marcus had just proudly presented to the powerful board. On the right side of the screen, an entirely new set of code rapidly appeared. The new code was deeply watermarked with a highly classified glowing red Vanguard Defense Solutions security seal. Let us look very closely at your revolutionary, completely unique system, Marcus, I announced, my steady voice echoing fiercely through the silent boardroom. I initiated a direct automated comparison sequence. The advanced computer system rapidly highlighted identical strings of code in bright flashing yellow. Line by line, paragraph by paragraph, the two sides of the massive screen matched flawlessly. It was a 100% identical match. Every single complex algorithm, every advanced security protocol, every single line of back-end architecture was an absolute carbon copy. Marcus stared blankly at the massive split screen, the blood draining completely from his face. His mouth opened wide, but he could not produce a single coherent sound. The devastating, catastrophic reality of the situation crashed down on his shoulders with the undeniable force of a speeding freight train. He slowly looked at me, his dark eyes wide with absolute primal terror. "You did not build this from the ground up, Marcus," I stated coldly, standing up slowly from the high-backed leather executive chair. "This is Vanguard's Project Archangel. It is a highly classified Tier 1 military asset. You just committed federal corporate espionage." The heavy silence following my bold declaration hung thickly in the air, like a sharp guillotine blade ready to drop. Marcus staggered backward, his expensive shoes squeaking loudly against the highly polished floor. He reached out blindly, his trembling fingers grasping at empty air to steady himself. He found nothing. His desperate gaze darted toward Harper, seeking the familiar support of the woman who had validated his delusions yesterday. He fully expected her to eagerly defend him now. I was profoundly mistaken. Harper possessed the lethal self-serving instincts of a cornered predator. The absolute certainty of federal prison time instantly shattered her fragile loyalty. She did not reach out to comfort her new husband. Instead, she recoiled from Marcus as if he were contagious. Her face twisted into a mask of revulsion. She took 3 rapid steps away from him, creating a vast physical divide between her dress and his impending criminal indictment. "Do not look at me!" Harper shrieked, her voice cracking with panic. She pointed a manicured finger directly at his chest, throwing him entirely under the bus without hesitation. "You lied to me. You are a disgusting, manipulative criminal. You told my father you were a brilliant tech innovator. You completely fabricated your entire portfolio to trick me into marrying you. I want an annulment right this very second. I will not let your pathetic scam drag my family's reputation through the mud." Marcus stared at his new bride, his heart breaking in real time. The ultimate prize he had sold his soul to win was now viciously discarding him in front of 12 elite executives. "Harper, please," Marcus begged, his voice a weak croak echoing in the room. "I did it for us. I did it to secure our future. I just needed initial capital to get my real projects off the ground. You have to believe me." "Shut your mouth, you pathetic fraud!" Harper spat, completely dropping the elegant socialite facade. "You are going to federal prison, and I will make sure my father's lawyers destroy whatever is left of your miserable life." Having successfully severed herself from the sinking ship, Harper immediately pivoted her attention back to the massive obsidian table. She took a deep breath, smoothing down her skirt, and forced a completely new, sickeningly sweet expression onto her face. The sheer audacity of her next move was breathtaking. She walked confidently toward my leather chair, acting as if she had not hurled a bottle of bleach at me just 2 days prior. She looked at me with wide, pleading blue eyes. "Nia, please," Harper begged, her tone dripping with manufactured sisterly affection. "You have to understand my position. I was completely manipulated by your psychotic brother. I am a victim here, just like you. Look at you now. You are an incredible chief executive officer. You are a billionaire. My father's country club is facing a minor liquidity crisis. We just need a short-term cash injection to satisfy some aggressive creditors. You have the power to save our generational estate. We are practically family now. Women should always support other women." I sat perfectly still, listening to the most hypocritical, intensely racist woman I had ever met beg me for a multi-million-dollar bailout. The 12 board members watched the pathetic display with cold, silent contempt. They knew exactly how I handled corporate parasites. I did not raise my voice. I did not insult her. I simply reached into the inner pocket of my blazer. "You have a selective memory regarding how you treat the women you consider family. Harper," I stated, my voice echoing coldly across the boardroom. "Do you remember the catering uniform you aggressively forced me to wear yesterday morning? You told me I belonged in the service industry. You demanded I hand out cheap champagne to your wealthy relatives. What you actually did was give me the perfect camouflage to conduct a highly classified internal audit." I placed a sleek silver remote control onto the obsidian table. I never wear unvetted garments without checking them for tactical advantages. I continued, maintaining unblinking eye contact with her. My director of security provided me with a military-grade micro camera. I pinned it directly to my lapel. It records flawless video and crystal clear audio. I left it recording while you were bragging to your bridesmaids. Harper's face drained of all color. Her mouth opened but her vocal cords paralyzed. I pressed the central button on the silver remote. The massive holographic screen behind me shifted instantly. The stolen code vanished, replaced by high-definition footage of the bridal suite. The audio piped clearly through the boardroom's surround sound speakers. Every single executive watched as the giant projection displayed Harper viciously pouring industrial bleach onto my custom bridesmaid dress. They listened in absolute silence as the recorded Harper laughed maliciously, boasting about ruining my life. But the dress was just the prelude. The video kept rolling. The board heard Harper explicitly detailing her father's elaborate illegal offshore tax evasion schemes. They heard her proudly explain exactly how she planned to use Marcus's tech company as a massive shell corporation to launder her family's hidden wealth and aggressively defraud the federal government out of millions of dollars. She laid out the entire criminal conspiracy with arrogant clarity. Harper stumbled backward, clutching her chest as if she were having a heart attack. Her breathing became frantic, ragged gasps. The undeniable proof of her financial crimes was currently playing in front of the most powerful defense contractors in the nation. I pressed the remote again, freezing the video on her sneering, triumphant face. I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table. I already forwarded that unedited footage to the federal authorities, along with the extensive financial dossier my elite acquisitions team compiled during our hostile takeover of your beloved country club. I announced my own, razor-sharp and absolutely final. You are not getting a bailout from me. Your family's estate was seized by the IRS an hour ago, Harper. Harper let out a sound that was half shriek and half choked gasp. Her legs gave out completely, sending her crumpling to the premium carpet in a heap of shattered delusions. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably as the reality of her sudden poverty crushed her. The board members did not blink at her dramatic display. They waited for the final phase of this corporate execution. Marcus stared at his weeping bride, then slowly turned his terrified eyes back to me. The heavy silence in the massive boardroom seemed to physically crush him. The sheer weight of his impending doom finally broke through his skull. His fabricated tech empire was gone. His wealthy white alliance was completely bankrupt. He was staring down the barrel of a lengthy federal prison sentence for high-level corporate espionage. The arrogant sales director who had strutted into this building acting like a king was dead. Marcus physically collapsed. His knees hit the polished floor with a loud, painful thud. He did not try to stand back up. He crawled forward on the ground, his expensive suit dragging across the carpet, until he was just a few feet away from the edge of the dark obsidian table. He looked up at me, tears streaming freely down his panicked face. His chest heaved with violent, desperate sobs. All his pathetic pride and toxic superiority had been violently ripped away, leaving nothing but a terrified, groveling shell of a man. "Nia, please!" Marcus begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, pathetic whine. He reached his shaking hands out toward me, palms turned upward in absolute surrender. "Please, you have to stop this. You cannot do this to me. I am your brother. I am your own flesh and blood. We share the same parents. We grew up in the same house. You are my little sister. You have to save my life. I will do anything you want. I will sign any contract. I will publicly apologize to you in front of the entire world. Just please, I am begging you, drop the corporate espionage charges. Do not let them send me to federal prison. It will completely destroy Mom and Dad. It will literally kill them to see their only son locked behind bars. You have the power to make all of this go away right now. Save me, Nia. Please save your family." I remained seated in my high-backed leather chair, staring down at the weeping, pathetic man crawling on my boardroom floor. I felt absolutely nothing. There was no pity, no lingering familial guilt, and no urge to offer him a lifeline. The toxic societal conditioning that demanded I sacrifice my own well-being to elevate the firstborn son had been completely eradicated from my mind. I looked at his desperate, tear-stained face and saw only a ruthless opportunist who had finally triggered a trap of his own making. He was not begging for forgiveness because he felt genuine remorse for his lifelong cruelty. He was only begging because he had lost the game and was terrified of the immediate severe consequences. You do not get to invoke the concept of blood or family now, Marcus. I stated, my voice echoing coldly off the high glass windows. You burned that bridge to ashes a long time ago. Do you remember standing in that upscale tailor shop last Saturday? You aggressively demanded that I empty my bank account to pay for your custom tuxedo just to appease a racist woman who called your sister ghetto. You smiled while my parents verbally abused me. Do you remember the rehearsal dinner at the country club? You actively tried to bleed my retirement funds dry so you could play pretend with a billionaire who despised you. You completely ignored my basic human dignity to secure your own fragile social elevation. Marcus sobbed louder, burying his face in his hands. I was wrong, Nia. I was so incredibly blind and stupid. I am so sorry. And yesterday morning, I continued, my tone sharp and unrelenting. When Harper violently ruined my bridesmaid dress with industrial bleach, you stood by and watched my parents force me into a scratchy catering uniform. You stood on a stage in front of 300 elite guests and pointed a spotlight directly at my face. You publicly humiliated me. You called me a bitter, useless burden. You told your wealthy friends that I was a pathetic failure who chose to hand out drinks because I could not handle real work. Marcus shook his head violently, his tears dripping onto the polished floor. I did not mean any of it, Nia. It was just a stupid, thoughtless joke. I was just trying to impress Richard. I swear to you, I will never disrespect you again. Just give me one more chance to prove I can be a good brother to you. I leaned forward, resting my forearms firmly on the edge of the cold obsidian table. I looked directly into his terrified, desperate eyes, ensuring my final words would be permanently burned into his memory. You told your groomsmen I could not hold a job, I said, delivering the final lethal blow with absolute chilling calm. You were wrong, Marcus. I just do not hire failures. The heavy mahogany, double doors at the back of the massive boardroom suddenly slid open with a smooth, mechanical hum. The loud sound made Marcus flinch violently, his entire body shaking with uncontrolled terror as the undeniable reality of his dire situation finally set in. He scrambled around on his knees, looking frantically toward the entrance. 4 highly trained federal agents stepped purposefully inside the secure room, their expressions grim and strictly professional. They wore dark suits with golden badges clearly displayed on their belts, and heavy steel handcuffs glinted sharply at their sides. They were responding directly to the Vanguard Chief Executive Officer's high-priority report of classified intellectual property theft, ready to make an immediate, highly public arrest. The heavy steel of the federal handcuffs snapped around my brother's wrists. The metallic click echoed across the silent boardroom. Marcus let out an agonizing scream as 4 trained agents hauled him roughly to his feet. He thrashed against their grips, craning his neck to look back at me. He sobbed uncontrollably, pleading for mercy, begging me to call off the federal hounds. I did not blink. I turned my chair toward the panoramic window, ignoring his pathetic wailing as they dragged him into the glass elevator. Harper was weeping uncontrollably on the premium carpet until my internal security team arrived to escort her out. Armed agents from the Internal Revenue Service were already waiting for her in the downstairs lobby. The toxic infection that had plagued my entire adult life was finally excised. I felt a profound sense of clarity. My empire was secure, and my ruthless brother was a ward of the federal penitentiary system. Later that afternoon, the pristine lobby of Vanguard Defense Solutions was violently disrupted. It was exactly 3 o'clock when my parents, Robert and Evelyn, frantically burst through the massive revolving glass doors. They looked absolutely unhinged. The meticulously curated upper-class facade they had spent their lives desperately maintaining had completely evaporated. My mother's expensive silk blouse was wrinkled, her hair disheveled from running frantic hands through it. My father's face was flushed a dangerous shade of crimson. Their premium Mercedes-Benz, the vehicle they constantly bragged about to their shallow social circle, had been brutally repossessed straight out of their driveway just 2 hours prior. Every single one of their high-limit credit cards had been frozen. They were officially destitute. Their golden son, the fabricated genius they worshipped, was currently sitting in a cold federal holding cell facing decades in prison. They aggressively bypassed the initial visitor check-in desk, loudly causing a massive scene. My mother shoved a highly trained receptionist, shrieking wildly that she needed immediate access to the chief executive officer. A dozen armed security guards instantly swarmed the lobby, firmly intercepting my parents before they could reach the private elevator banks. I was already watching the pathetic spectacle from the glass-enclosed mezzanine balcony overlooking the expansive lobby. I smoothed the lapels of my custom suit and calmly entered the private elevator. The transparent doors slid open on the ground floor. My parents spotted me instantly. The aggressive rage in their eyes swiftly morphed into a sickening display of extreme desperation. My mother pushed past a security guard and threw herself onto the polished quartz floor right at my feet. "Nia, please!" My mother wailed loudly, trying to grab my ankles. "You have to help us right now." Federal authorities raided Marcus's startup office. They locked him in a cage. They took everything. You have massive government connections. You have the power to fix this terrible mistake. You have to call the top generals and make them drop these ridiculous espionage charges immediately. He is your own flesh and blood. My father stepped forward, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. He tried to muster his old authority, but he looked completely broken. "You are deliberately destroying this family, Nia. You are ruthlessly tearing down everything we built. You are single-handedly ruining our legacy of black excellence. How can you be so incredibly bitter and evil? Marcus made a tiny mistake. You cannot let them throw a successful black man into the federal prison system. It will completely destroy our esteemed reputation in the community." I looked down at my mother crying on the floor. I looked at my father attempting to weaponize racial solidarity to save a blatant criminal. The hypocrisy of their intense guilt-tripping was absolutely staggering. "Do not you dare speak to me about our legacy or black excellence." I stated, my voice a low whisper that instantly silenced their screaming. "There is absolutely zero excellence in what you raised Marcus to be. You raised a lazy, arrogant thief. You conditioned him to steal the hard work of others and claim it as his own. You willingly watched him aggressively humiliate your own daughter, force me into a catering uniform, and publicly disown me just to appease a toxic racist white family. You happily traded your bloodline for an illusion of high society." My mother sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "We were just trying to survive, Nia." "You chose to elevate a fraud," I corrected coldly. "I will not lift a single finger to save a man who actively attempted to steal my classified military technology." My father let out a desperate gasp. "Nia, please, we have absolutely nothing left. The banks froze everything. Our cars are completely gone. We cannot afford groceries tonight. You are a billionaire. You have endless resources. You must give us a financial bailout. We are your parents. You owe us for giving you life." I maintained unblinking eye contact with my truly frantic father. I calmly reached into the inner right pocket of my tailored designer blazer. I pulled out a crisply folded heavy legal document bearing a bright red municipal seal. I held the thick document out toward him. My father's trembling hands slowly reached up and took it. He unfolded the thick paper, his tired, defeated eyes scanning the bold, aggressive legal text. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost. "What is this?" My father stammered, his voice a terrified whisper. "That is an official eviction notice," I announced, ensuring my voice carried clearly across the silent lobby. "That beautiful ancestral mansion you have been living in and endlessly bragging about to your country club friends. You have not actually owned it for 5 years. When you faced massive foreclosure due to reckless spending, Vanguard Defense Solutions quietly purchased the entire estate through a blind trust to keep you off the streets. You have been living in my property for free. Now you have exactly 48 hours to vacate the premises." My mother let out a guttural, agonizing wail that tore through the pristine corporate lobby. The sheer shock of the eviction notice completely shattered her fragile socialite facade. She dropped heavily to her knees on the cold quartz floor. Her designer handbag spilled open, scattering luxury cosmetics across the polished stone. She lunged forward desperately, trying to grab my hand with her trembling fingers. I took a deliberate, measured step backward, leaving her grasping empty air. "We are your parents!" My mother screamed, her face contorted in absolute raw desperation. Tears ruined her heavy makeup, leaving dark streaks down her cheeks. "We raised you from a child. We fed you and clothed you. You absolutely cannot do this to us, Nia. You cannot leave us out on the street with nothing to our names. We will have absolutely nowhere to go. Our friends will completely abandon us. You must show some mercy." My father stood paralyzed, staring at the thick legal document in his hands. His chest heaved as his mind violently rejected the undeniable reality of his complete financial ruin. He slowly looked up at me, his eyes wide and hollow. The arrogant, commanding patriarch who had aggressively humiliated me at the country club rehearsal dinner was entirely gone. He was nothing but a broken, terrified old man, facing the consequences of his lifelong vanity. "You have stolen everything from us," my father whispered, his voice cracking horribly. "You took our son, you took our reputation, now you are taking our family home. How can you live with yourself?" I looked down at the two people who had spent my entire life, making me feel incredibly small and entirely worthless. I did not feel a single ounce of pity or guilt. I only felt the pure cleansing fire of long overdue justice. "I did not steal a single thing from you," I stated, my voice ringing out with absolute unwavering clarity. Every security guard and employee in the vast lobby stood in perfect silence, hanging on my every word. "I simply stopped paying for the massive illusion you chose to live in. You built your entire identities around the concept of Black excellence. You constantly preached about elevating our people, about legacy, and about standing tall in a world designed to break us. But your version of excellence was nothing but a cowardly lie." My mother sobbed louder, rocking back and forth on the hard floor. "We just wanted to be respected in the community, Nia. We just wanted the absolute best for our children." "No, you wanted the best for Marcus," I corrected her coldly, refusing to let her rewrite history. "And you wanted respect from the very people who actively despised you. Selling out your own daughter to appease a toxic, overtly racist white family is not Black excellence. It is the absolute highest form of cowardice. You happily watched Harper humiliate me. You watched her intentionally ruin my custom bridesmaid dress with industrial bleach. You watched her demand that I put on a catering uniform and serve her wealthy relatives like a second-class citizen. You did not stand up for me. You did not protect your own blood. You forced me to comply so you could keep sitting at their table." My father closed his eyes, fresh tears leaking out from beneath his wrinkled eyelids. He had no defense. The irrefutable truth was suffocating him. "You chose the shiny, fake illusion of wealth over the actual reality of having a loyal family." I continued, unleashing the heavy burden I had carried for 34 years. "You actively protected an abusive, manipulative son who stole military secrets just because he wore a nice suit and played the corporate game. You thought I was a massive disappointment because I did not brag about my achievements or seek the validation of elite country clubs. You measured my entire worth by my willingness to be subservient to your fragile egos. You were so blinded by the desperate need to look successful that you completely failed to realize you were entirely dependent on the daughter you so deeply loathed." "Please, Nia," my mother begged, her voice hoarse and broken. She clasped her hands together in a prayerful gesture. "I am so incredibly sorry. I will do whatever you want. I will go to therapy. I will make a public apology to you right now. Just please do not take our home away. We are too old to start completely over from scratch." "You are not starting over from scratch," I replied, my tone devoid of any sympathy or warmth. "You are starting over from exactly where your personal finances left you 5 years ago. I am merely removing the invisible safety net I provided. You will have to learn how to survive on your own merits without using my money to fund your superiority complex." I looked at them one last time. There was absolutely nothing left to say. The deep, agonizing wound they had inflicted on my childhood had finally healed, leaving behind thick scar tissue. They held zero power over my emotions, my career, or my future. I was completely and utterly free. I turned my back on them. I did not hesitate. I did not look over my shoulder to see them weeping pathetically on the expensive marble floor. I began walking toward the glass elevator that would take me back up to the 50th floor of my empire. My mother let out another frantic, desperate scream, attempting to scramble to her feet to chase after me. She did not make it past the first step. Elias moved with swift, flawless military precision. He stepped smoothly between my retreating figure and my frantic parents. He signaled the heavily armed lobby security team with a sharp, decisive wave of his hand. 6 guards instantly closed ranks around my weeping mother and frozen father. "The chief executive officer has no further time for non-employees," Elias stated. "Escort them out right now, please." The heavy reinforced glass doors of the Vanguard lobby slid shut behind my weeping parents, sealing them outside in the cold afternoon air. They were permanently locked out of my successful life. Elias turned back toward me, giving a sharp, definitive nod of confirmation. The extraction of my highly toxic biological family was finally completely finished. I did not bother to watch them walk away into the busy city streets. I simply stepped into my private elevator and returned to my sanctuary on the 50th floor. The suffocating, heavy emotional weight I had carried alone since my turbulent childhood was entirely gone, forever replaced by a profound, unshakable inner peace. 3 months later, the harsh winter had melted into a vibrant, unforgiving spring. The relentless gears of federal justice had moved with terrifying efficiency, absolutely crushing the people who had tried to bury me. Marcus was currently residing in a maximum security federal penitentiary, serving a non-negotiable 15-year sentence for high-level corporate espionage and the theft of classified military technology. His expensive custom suits had been permanently replaced by a scratchy, oversized orange jumpsuit. He had desperately tried to negotiate a plea deal offering to testify against his competitors, but the digital evidence I provided was far too comprehensive. There was no charm or arrogant salesman smile that could save him from the cold steel bars of his new reality. He was a nameless inmate, entirely stripped of the unearned privilege he had wielded like a weapon his entire life. Harper faced an equally devastating reality. Her father's sprawling real estate empire was systematically dismantled and auctioned off by the Internal Revenue Service to cover massive, decades-long tax fraud. The elite country club, the luxury cars, and the offshore accounts were completely eradicated. Stripped of her generational wealth and her toxic social armor, Harper was forced to face the real world. I recently received a highly amusing intelligence report confirming that she was currently working a minimum wage job as a barista at a strip mall coffee shop. She spent her days wearing a stained polyester apron, forced to serve the exact same working-class people she had viciously mocked at her ruined wedding. The bitter irony of her demanding I wear a catering uniform was a poetic justice that required absolutely no intervention on my part. My parents suffered the most agonizing fall from grace. Exactly 48 hours after I handed them the eviction notice, they were physically removed from the ancestral mansion they had fraudulently paraded as their own. With their credit lines frozen and their assets seized, they were forced to rent a tiny, cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a noisy, rundown neighborhood located on the far edge of the city. Their prestigious social circle immediately vanished. The country club elites they had so desperately worshipped completely blacklisted them, treating them like a highly contagious disease. They were left with absolutely nothing but the crushing, suffocating silence of their own massive regrets. They had sacrificed their only loyal daughter to protect an illusion, and now they were trapped in a miserable reality with no golden child to save them. I sat on the expansive glass balcony of my multi-million-dollar penthouse, feeling the warm evening breeze wash over my face. I took a deep, refreshing breath, savoring the tranquility of my new reality. There were no more forced smiles, no more hidden agendas. The sprawling city skyline glittered brilliantly below me, a vast network of lights that mirrored the massive empire I had built from the shadows. The sweet, smoky aroma of grilled steak drifted through the open sliding doors, blending perfectly with the sound of genuine, unfiltered laughter. I turned my head and looked inside my spacious, warmly lit living room. Elias was standing by the kitchen island, expertly flipping meat on an indoor grill while loudly debating military tactics with 3 other members of my former covert operations squad. They were hardened veterans, men and women, who had bled with me in hostile territories and trusted me with their lives. There was no toxic competition here. There was no demand for subservience or fake excellence. We were a tight-knit unit forged in the absolute hottest fires of survival and mutual respect. This was my true chosen family. They did not care about the balance of my checking account or the prestige of my title. They only cared that I had their backs, just as I undeniably had theirs. I turned my attention back to the glittering city below. I raised my left hand, the city lights illuminating the pale, jagged thermal burn scar running deeply along my wrist. It was a permanent reminder of the immense pain I had endured to secure my absolute freedom. For 34 years, I had allowed my biological family to convince me that I was a worthless burden. I had let them diminish my brilliant mind and mock my quiet resilience. But the fire that burned that classified brand into my flesh had also forged an unbreakable titanium core within my spirit. I took a slow, deliberate sip from the heavy crystal glass of aged bourbon, resting securely in my right hand. The smooth, fiery liquid burned pleasantly down my throat, grounding me entirely in the present moment, reminding me of my hard-won journey. I did not ever need to scream at my parents to make them finally understand my immense, undeniable value. I did not need to physically destroy my brother or his racist bride to firmly prove my absolute superiority in this world. The universe always had an incredibly efficient, satisfying way of balancing the scales when you simply allowed foolish, arrogant people the space to blindly destroy themselves. I smiled, letting the cool wind brush against my cheeks. The sweetest revenge is not screaming or destroying someone. It is simply letting them dig their own graves with their arrogance, while you sit comfortably at the top of the empire they said you could never build.